host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. Salvati.
All right. Happy Tuesday, guys. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you had a great New Year's Eve as well. And welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And you can catch me here Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, except I took yesterday off because I streamed on New Year's Eve, so I gave myself a little bit of a break there. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter, and let's go ahead and get started, guys. We have so much to talk about tonight. I am going to do call-in after the show tonight as well. I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to Sabby patrons. You guys know what you do. You keep the lights on around here. Thank you so much, Sabby patrons. If any of you are interested in becoming a patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen on the ticker there as well. And I also want to give a special shout out tonight to a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's go ahead and give it up for James Wellesley Wheat. Whoop, whoop. Thank you so much and welcome. Welcome. Okay, let's go ahead and give a couple shout outs to people in the chat. I can't wait to get into these stories tonight. We have so much to say. So much to talk about. What's going on, Mastermind Hour? Sabby, would you watch a YouTube video for me? It's called A Killer in the Park by Justice Brothers. I can't get anybody to give. By the way, YouTube changed their profanity policy, so I have to be careful with my language now. Not that I do that often, but just letting you guys know. No one cares about Gage. I can check that out. Shout out to Hannah G, says Glenn has been on fire lately. Yes, he has. I have a story about him tonight. Shout out to Ben, who's a Sabby member, says happy Tuesday. All I had the day. I had the day off. Okay. Congratulations there. Shout out to Steve, says hello, everybody. Greetings. McFullen Lovin, who's a Sabby member, says, Happy New Year, Sabby. So glad to be able to tune into the live stream for once without work interfering. Don't you just hate that? I used to listen to live streams sometimes when I was at work. Shout out to Good Cookie, says, good to see you, Sabby. And as always, it's a pleasure to talk to all of you in the chat. Hope everyone had a good new year. Back to the grind. That's right. We're right back at it. Shout out to Saul, says, hello, all you beautiful people. Hi, Sabby. Hello, Saul. Greetings, Greg Bruce, says, that picture of Benedict Cumberbatch is hilarious. That is a funny picture. I didn't realize how funny it was until after I was finished with the thumbnail, and I looked at it again and I was like, oh, damn. That was kind of funny. All right. What's going on? Eric T. Red, who's a Sabby member, says, hello and welcome to Sabby 2023. That's right. This is the first show of 2023 for you guys. So I got a lot to say. What's going on? Rick says, hey, y'all. Shout out to Dabby Dab, says, Sabby time with a smile. Greetings, Sebastian says, hey, y'all. Shout out to Lorez. Hi, Sabrina, Eric, Sabby fam. Sigh. More proof the squad could have done more. See that vote today? Oh, we're going to get into all of that tonight. Shout out to Deneen, says, doobie doobie doo. Hey, Sabinators. What's going on, Eric Gray? Sup, y'all? I got into a very interesting discussion with the other commenters on the most recent reparations video on the African Diaspora News channel. Yes, we'll get into that tonight. Shout out to Jose, says, yay, it's Sabby. Blessings to all. Thank you so much, Jose. What's going on? Ron Wells says, hi, everyone. Bling Girl is in the house, says, Happy New Year, all. Greetings Art says doobie doobie doo. Shout out to Vegan Goddess says, yay, Sabby. Hello, everyone. Greetings Oz sends a smiley face with sunglasses on. We're calling it a cool smiley. What's going on? Apaturum says Sabby. Apaturum. Shout out to Nancy says, hello, Sabby, and happy new year. Okay. And let's give a special hello here to my comrade from RBN, JB. I had him and then I lost him. I saw his name and then it moved too fast. I'm sorry. Shout out to JB says, hello, my people. Hello. Hello, hello. Hello. All right, let's go ahead and get into it tonight. Let me go ahead and share that beautiful thumbnail. I think my thumbnail game has come up over the past year or so. Huh? Do you think? Maybe? Yeah? Okay, tonight we are going to discuss Glenn Greenwald exposes class, and among other things, he's about to break that down. We're going to get into that discussion tonight. I'm also going to discuss Kevin McCarthy votes. Oh, Kevin. Kevin is having a rough day. All right, we're also going to discuss Tim Pool and Benedict Cumberbatch. Reparations. What is that all about? Oh, yes. We are going to get into that discussion tonight. And I'm also going to discuss Colorado ballot initiative wins. So we are continuing on that discussion about the state wins for ballot initiatives. So let's actually go ahead and get started with that story. Now, we're moving through these states alphabetically. We have now made it to the state of Colorado. I'm going to do half of Colorado tonight and the other half on Thursday because Colorado, like Arizona, like Alabama, has a lot. So I'm splitting it in half tonight. Let's go ahead and get started with that Rocky Mountain High state. Oh, man. Rocky Mountain High, Colorado. You guys remember that song? Rocky Mountain High. Okay, anyway. Colorado ballot initiatives. Citizens of Colorado may initiate legislation as either a state statute or constitutional amendment through the process of direct initiative. Again, this is another direct state, meaning that successful petitions bypass the Colorado legislature and go directly on the ballot. Don't you just love these, the ones that just go directly on? Directly on the ballot for voters to vote on to pass as a law or ratify as an amendment. In Colorado, citizens have the power to repeal legislation via veto referendum. The Colorado General Assembly, like other 49 states, may also place measures on the ballot as legislatively referred constitutional amendments or legislatively referred state statutes. Referred amendments require 2/3 vote of each chamber. There is a note here from Roger Meadows. I want to read part of this in reference to the signatures, because I told you it's different depending on the state. In Colorado, the number of signatures required for a successful petition, be they constitutional amendments, statutes, and referendums, is 5% of the total number of votes cast for the office of Colorado Secretary of State in the preceding general election, who's elected every 4 years. Check this out. The distribution requirement of 2% of the registered voters who live in each of the state's 35 Senate districts for initiated constitutional amendments, with the requirement based on the Senate district boundaries and the number of registered voters at the time the initiative petition is approved for circulation. So this means the percentage of signatures one must gather per legislative district. Now, again, one thing I've explained to you guys, depending on the state that you live in, the number may vary and the timeline may vary. So let's get to that point because this is important as well. This piece here, let me Find doot, 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 doot. Deadlines for collection. This is the piece, I think, where some people may get discouraged depending on the timeline that you have to get this accomplished. In Colorado, petitioners have 6 months to collect signatures after the ballot language and title are finalized. 6 months. This piece here, referendum signatures must be submitted 90 days following the adjournment of the legislative session at which the legislation targeted by the referendum was approved. Now, look at this note here from Roger Meadows. I think this is important. Only 6 months to collect signatures for laws and amendments and 3 months for repealers, while Arizona, which is the same size as Colorado, gets 2 years. And this is the piece here where some, organizers may feel discouraged depending on the state that they live in. Some of the progressive policies have been passed in Colorado. Let's remember, Colorado, I believe, was the first state to legalize marijuana. And they were like, let's, make cannabis shops. They were the first ones, I think, to have the shops, right? But think about what people must go through just to get these policies on the ballot, because Colorado only allows them to have 6 months to collect the signatures. And to the point that Roger Meadows is making, Arizona, which is technically the same size as Colorado, they have 2 years to collect those signatures. So imagine if you have to get 4,000 signatures or 400,000 signatures, as Whole Washington was discussing with Washington State. If you have to get 400,000 signatures and you only have 6 months, how on earth are you going to be able to do that? How on earth? Could you imagine? So this is where some people, again, may become discouraged. That's why I wanted to point that piece out there. Now, let's go ahead and get into the first ballot measure here. Colorado Amendment D, designate judges to 23rd Judicial District measure. This ballot initiative passed by 67.38%. Let's go ahead and get into it. So it was approved. A yes vote supported this constitutional amendment to direct the governor to assign judges from the 18th Judicial District to the new 23rd Judicial District by November 30th, 2024, and require these judges to establish residence in the new 23rd Judicial District by January 7th, 2025. A 55% supermajority vote was required for this one, just for this one. It was supported by, if you live in Colorado, you may want to know this, it was supported by these state senators: Rhonda Fields, Bob Gardner, Mike Weissman, and Kevin Van Winkle. So, in reference to opposition, Amendment D, Colorado Blue Book official arguments. Amendment D is not the only way to assign judges to the 23rd Judicial District. The Constitution and the state statute allow for judges to be appointed through a vacancy process or to serve in other district under certain circumstances. So that's important to note there as well. Now, let's go to the second one here. This one kind of hits close to home for me. Colorado Amendment E, homestead exemption to surviving spouses of U.S. Armed Forces members and veterans measure. This passed by 87.93%. So a yes vote supported extending an existing primary residence property tax exemption available to qualifying seniors and disabled veterans to the surviving spouses of military service members who died in the line of duty and the surviving spouses of veterans who died as a result of service-related injury or disease. Let's talk about this property tax exemption. There was another state I went over already that did something similar to this, but it was in reference to people who are disabled, right? Property taxes can be expensive depending on which state you live in. But what can happen sometimes for someone who has a spouse, I don't think this should just be for military spouses, by the way. I want to be clear about that one. I see what they're trying to do, but I don't think it should just be for military spouses. If you have a spouse and your spouse passes away, what I have seen happen oftentimes is that now you have a spouse who is widowed and they are now one income, whereas before they were possibly two income. Or, they could have done like my parents did for a while, where the military spouse was the only one that was employed and the other spouse was at home taking care of the kids. So, that being said, if your spouse were to pass away, now you still have the house. You still have to pay the mortgage and you still have to pay the property taxes on that house. Because let's be real, the property tax company, like, they don't care. The state doesn't care that your spouse passed away. They want their money. So what states like Colorado is trying to do is they're trying to provide some type of a property tax exemption for those people who were married to military spouses and the spouse, whatever, has either passed away or they're disabled veteran, um, or they had a service related injury, which obviously is going to prevent them from still staying in the military. So some people will get like an honorable discharge because of that. So this is something we need to talk about more, about people who are widows and, their spouses have passed away and they still have to deal with all of the financial burden that they may not have had such a burden with when the spouse was still alive. So I think they should extend this to everyone that is going through this, everyone who's a widow, like give them that same option in reference to that property tax exemption, because oftentimes what will end up happening is they'll end up selling the home and downsizing, selling the home and getting an apartment or a condo, that kind of thing, and not being able to keep the home. That's right, Sebastian. I watch Purple Hearts, which covers this, and it's terrible. Yes, there's a movie. I was going to bring that. There's a movie on Netflix called Purple Heart. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. It brings up this issue. Okay, moving along. There was no opposition to this amendment. So the senators that approved it, Jeff Bridges, Paul Lundeen, Tim Gaitner, and Kathy Kipp. The next amendment here, this one did not pass. Colorado amended F, charitable gaming measure. It failed. The votes were 59.36%. Now, a yes vote supported amending the Constitution to do the following: repeal the ban on paying managers and operators of charitable gaming activities and limit compensation amounts to the applicable, sorry, I can talk tonight, minimum wage until July 1st, 2024. Allow the legislature to determine in statute how long an organization must exist before obtaining a charitable gaming license after January 1st, 2025, and it would reduce from 5 years to 3 years the length of time an organization must exist before obtaining a charitable gaming license through January 1st, 2025. Again, this measure was defeated. Now, something I want to point out to you, I've noticed for every state I've brought this up with so far, the gaming ballot measures are not passing. So far, they're not. So this is something I want people to keep in mind. It seems like when it comes to direct democracy, so far in these states, the gaming, whether it's gaming for the measures for gaming for on indigenous communities, did not pass. Whether it's gaming for in reference to sports betting, did not pass. And that was in California. So this is similar to something that I did see in Massachusetts a while back when they first started talking about bringing casinos here to Massachusetts. Residents were heavily against it. Now that casino still happened. So if you ever come here and if you do like to gamble, I've never been to a casino, but if you do like to gamble, what used to be, I think it was Wingate. I remember there was I forget what they changed the name of that casino to, but there was a whole beef about it because the original owner was in trouble for like sexual harassment. And so they changed the name of it to, see, this goes to show you, I don't even remember the name of the casino. I have to check that out. But anyway, the casino went up Anyway, and the residents, mainly a lot of the ones that lived in Everett, Massachusetts, they said, no, we do not want a casino near this area because it's going to cause a lot of traffic. They also brought up prostitution, which was really weird to me. I was just like, you can have that regardless if you have a casino. I'm sorry, but hey, that exists with or without casinos. Um, Actually, I'm curious now. I have to look up the name to that casino because I forget. Massachusetts casinos. Because we don't have that. I mean, it's not that many of them here. Um, Massachusetts casino. What is the name of that place? Like, it's like I can see the building, but I can't. Um, I don't know if anybody in the chat know. Eric, do you remember Encore? Yes, thank you. Rashad the Great. It's called Encore. And originally, I think it was something, it was Win, I think was the original name, but the owner got in trouble for it. So there was that. Anyway, Encore went up anyway, even though the majority of the residents did not want it. So it's interesting. It still happened here. But apparently, like I said, in all the states I've mentioned so far, these gaming the gaming initiatives are not passing. Let's move on. All right. So who was for it? State Senators Robert Rodriguez, Jim Smallwood, David Ortiz, not the Big Poppy one, and Perry Will. Organizations, Colorado Charitable Bingo Association. Now, who was against it? Colorado Veterans of Foreign Wars. They were against it. And they said if Amendment F is passed, this will allow any fly-by-night operator to invade Colorado, operate, and then flee as fast as they came as they depart Colorado with the profits, thereby leaving the nonprofits of Colorado without one of their larger revenue streams. Doesn't that apply to pretty much any casino, though? I mean, don't people go to Vegas and gamble and then leave and go back home? And I don't know. I don't know. You can tell me. You can tell me. The next measure here, this one's a big one. Colorado Proposition FF. Reduce income tax deduction amounts to fund school meals program measure. This passed, it was close, 56.75%. So again, this one, it's a huge one to me because I'm really into, education here. It says a yes vote for this ballot measure reduces income tax deductions for those earning $300,000 or more from $30,000 for single filers and $60,000 for joint filers to $12,000 for single filers and $6,000 for joint filers. And it allocates revenue from the deduction change to create and fund the Healthy School Meals for All program, to reimburse participating schools, to provide free meals to students, and provide schools with local food purchasing grants and school food related funding. Now, I've told you guys this before. I really believe that school lunch and school breakfast should be free at these public schools. I've always felt that way. Feed the kids for all of them. Don't just make it like how we have it now, where it's mean tested and some kids get like the reduced lunch or they get like a free lunch. Just do free lunch for everybody. I think in France they do it that way, if I'm not mistaken. And then that way it takes away the kind of reminds me of UBI a bit, because it takes away the stigma, Like I would think about that sometimes, like the kids that were on reduced lunch or had free lunch, and then everybody else would pull out like their money to pay for lunch. And it's just like, you knew who the kids were that had the free lunch because they didn't have to pull out any. It just, I don't know, take the stigma away and just give the lunch to everybody. So it's great that Colorado is trying to bring something like this to be, because it says yes on FF, Healthy School Meals for All. Healthy school meals for all Colorado students and Hunger Free Colorado led the Yes on FF campaign. Who opposed it? Everybody remember this name, John Caldara, president of the Independence Institute. So, what's happening, John? What's happening here? This is what John said. This is really a stupid idea. This proposal is, hey, let's get the rich guys to buy our kids lunch. I don't see the problem, John. I don't see the problem, John. Boy, I tell you. State Representative Richard Holtorf said, my kids are grown, but if I had kids, how can I sit here and say my kids should have a free lunch if I'm making six figures? I don't think that's right. So I have a fundamental problem with the premise of the bill. People that could afford to pay need to pay to subsidize programs needed to help the people who need the subsidies. Again, if you were to go look at the budget, if we change the way that some of these budgets are in some of these states, we could definitely give more when it comes to education. But a lot of times, if you pay attention, when these states cut the budget, education is one of the first places that they'll touch, as if it's not important for people to have a decent education. Anyway, it passed. Moving on to the next one. This is funny because Roger Meadows said John Caldera and State Rep Holtorf are real dicks. What's this, Derek? Caldera is a libertarian radio host tool. That is good to know. Thank you for letting me know, Derek. That explains a lot. Not the libertarian part, but the tool part. All right, moving on. This one here, Colorado Proposition GG, include income tax effects in ballot language measure. This passed by 71.92%. A yes vote supported requiring ballot titles and fiscal impact summaries for initiatives that affect income taxes to include information on how the change would affect income taxes for different categories of income. I agree with this. I think it is important for people to know how they are going to be affected depending on which tax bracket they fall into. So I have no issue with that. Supported by Dominic Moreno, Brittany Peterson, Chris Kennedy, and Mike Weissman. And it was opposed by Michael Fields, president of the Advanced Colorado Institute. You guys starting to see a pattern here? Okay. And then we're going to do one more. Colorado Proposition 121, State Income Tax Rate Reduction Initiative. A yes vote supported decreasing the state income tax rate from 4.55% to 4.40%, including for domestic and foreign C corporations for tax years commencing on or after January 1st, 2022. This passed by 65.24%. Now, this is supported by Jerry Sonnenberg, and the organizations are Coloradans for Civil Liberties, Colorado Rising Action, Defend Colorado, and Independence Institute, and also Scott Wasserman, president of the Bell Policy Center and the Bell Action Network. So those were the supporters. And then I didn't see opponents for this one. So one of the things it says here is that the initiative would actually undo the small step Colorado has taken towards a fair tax structure and benefit the wealthiest Coloradans. That's one of the arguments against it. Roger Meadows put a comment here and said, Scott Wasserman sounds like someone to get in contact with to push CBI amendment for a Colorado public bank. Because what Scott said here is this November, you're going to be asked once again, if you want to lower your income taxes, it would be a simple proposition Do you want to pay less? Hidden from that question will be the consequences for our schools, health, and public safety. In truth, these consequences are real. It's a bait and switch. So yeah, I agree with Roger Meadows on that. It would be better if they did have a public bank, and then that would solve that issue that he has there. All right, I lied. I'm ending with this one because this one is based. Derek says, I voted no on this. Decrease sales tax, increase income tax. They always want to raise sales taxes, which are regressive. Interesting. That's interesting, Derek. It's nice to know someone from Colorado's in the chat. Okay, last one here, and then I'll finish the other half on Thursday. Colorado Proposition 122, decriminalization and regulated access program for certain psychedelic plants and fungi initiative. Well. This did pass. It was close. 53.64%. A yes vote supported the following: defining certain psychedelic plants as fungi as natural medicine, including DMT, ibogaine, mescaline, excluding peyote. I cannot pronounce this one. Psilocybin and psilocin. Decriminalizing the personal use, possession, growth, and transport of natural medicines for persons 21 years old and older, and creating the regulated natural medicine access program for licensed healing centers to administer natural medicine services. So this is coming off of, this is Colorado, but let's all remember, I believe it was, yes, it's Oregon. I always get confused. I'm like, was it Oregon or Washington State? It was Oregon that decriminalized all drugs. So you see what I mean? How when I tell you that you need that one state to get it through, and then that makes other states to start to think maybe we could do the same thing, or maybe we should try to at least do the same thing. Now you have Colorado. They just passed decriminalization of certain psychedelics. Now, who supported this bad boy? This was supported by New Approach PAC and Natural Medicine Colorado. And let me see if there were any opponents. The opponents were Luke Neferotos. He's the executive vice president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Interesting. And who else do we have here? I think that's the only individual. Okay. Yes. So Roger put a note here too that I thought was interesting. He said, see what I tell you, people love their vices except for gambling. Yeah, the gambling one is not doing too well in the States so far that I've gone through. Not doing too well. Yeah. Let me go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Pierre. Glenn has been kind of all over the place, praising McCarthy dissenters in one tweet, then praising MTG for backing him in the next. Interesting. JB says, Benedict Cumberbatch, more like Benedict Arnold Bad Batch. Am I right? Is that a dad joke, JB? Angela says, David Byrne has the best tagline for today in Washington, D.C., burn down the house. Derek says Native people were against it because they don't want people poaching all their peyote, as it takes a long time to grow and only in certain areas. That was a legit concern. Okay, that's good to know. I didn't realize that. All right, guys, take that time and go ahead and smash that like button if you haven't had a chance to do so. And we're going to go ahead and bring up these comments from Rockfin, and then I'll dive into the next story. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Roger Meadows. Sabby, 2016 Colorado voters approved Amendment 71, an initiated constitutional amendment that imposed a 55% to ratify constitutional amendments, including be they initiated by the voters or the legislature. Amendment 71 contained an exception for amendments written to do nothing but remove language from the Constitution for which a simple majority is still required for approval. Thank you so much for that, Roger. And thank you for this tip as well. Yes, just like Derek said, GOP is always in favor of the sales tax because they are supporters of a flat tax, not progressive tax, where a number of tax breaks are established. But with the flat tax, it hurts the poor people more than their donors. Sales tax means nothing to the rich. They can pay that with their eyes closed, yet the poor are getting killed. Well said there, Roger. Okay. We're moving on to our next story here. I told you it's going to be an interesting night. The story I think a lot of you have been waiting for is this update with Kevin McCarthy. Now, I told you a week or two ago that Kevin McCarthy was having a difficult time getting all of the Republicans in the House on board to support him as Speaker of the House. Now, I did get a recent update before I went live about this as well, and I was able to add that to this as well. But I want to start back just to show you what some of the concerns were and how much of a struggle Kevin McCarthy actually has had. Now, I want to give a shout out here to Case Study QB for this clip. Let's take a look back and see why people were not so quick and willing to vote for Kevin per se and the trouble he's had along the way.
All right. Also this morning, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy is working the phones today, literally, in hopes of locking in more support for next week's vote for House Speaker. It's happening on Tuesday in just a matter of days from now. CNN has learned that he's scheduled a conference call this afternoon to try to iron out potential rule changes ahead of the new Congress on Tuesday. CNN's Melanie Zanona is live on Capitol Hill. Melanie, what are we learning about? I know there's been a lot of good negotiations happening behind the scenes as McCarthy is trying to get to those votes. Some members want these rule changes. What exactly are they debating over behind the scenes?
Okay, so the big debate here is over this tool known as the motion to vacate. That would force a floor vote on ousting the sitting speaker. Currently, the majority of the entire conference has to agree to use that rule, but McCarthy's critics want to change it so that any single member can force a floor vote on deposing the sitting speaker. Up until this point, McCarthy has not wanted to budge on that issue. However, as he has struggled to lock down the speaker's votes here, I am told that in private conversations this week, he has made an offer to his critics that he is willing to agree to a lower threshold than what it currently is. In fact,
let's hold on and let's take a look here at concessions to try to clinch speakership, lowering the number of votes needed to oust a sitting speaker. Currently need a majority to call to vacate the speaker's chair. McCarthy is considering lowering the number to 5 votes, and Representative Matt Gaetz and Ralph Norman say that is still too high. So remember what I've told you before, they can always try to come in and change the rules. And sometimes these things do happen. We've seen this happen, whether it's the Republican Party or Democratic Party. They can try to come in and just change the rules. So let's continue. I have more news about this, but let's continue.
One of the numbers that's come up in conversations has been a 5-person threshold. So potentially a really big concession from McCarthy here. But of course, time is running out and it's unclear if even that could get him enough votes for Speaker on January 3rd, Caitlin.
Yeah, the 5-person threshold would be incredibly notable. We talked to Fred Upton in recent days. He's leaving Congress, but he said he does not believe McCarthy should agree to these terms. He only has a few days left to really get the votes that he needs. It's not clear that there's any alternative to him, I should say. We haven't seen anyone who's been able to garner a lot of support. So where does it seem headed, as of Friday, December 30th, before we hit Tuesday?
Well, Caitlin, I think we're going to learn a lot later this afternoon. As you mentioned, there is a critical conference call that McCarthy has convened between some of these different wings of the party. I do suspect that motion to vacate, that tool we were talking about, that will come up. McCarthy is going to try to find a sweet spot that will essentially, appease enough of his critics to allow them to vote for him without alienating the moderates in his party. But January 3rd is fast approaching. Members aren't here right now, so that makes it also more difficult for McCarthy to sort of round up the votes. So it is very possible that we could see this thing go to multiple ballots for the first time since 1923.
Well, she was right about that.
All right, we'll be watching closely. Melanie Zanona, thank you.
Okay, so that was that. Kevin's still struggling there to get the number of votes that he needs in order to get that speakership. And I want to take a look back here to show you that there were 9 hard Republicans that were willing to hold their vote for Kevin McCarthy here. So I want to go into this piece here from Insider. 9 hardline Republicans are willing to support Kevin McCarthy's bid for Speaker of the House, demanding more concessions. So the key word here is concessions. My. This is just what happened with, or what we were trying to get happen with the squad, right? Forcing the vote, withholding their vote for Nancy Pelosi unless they get Medicare for all on the floor for a vote. And by the way, the concession was one thing: bring Medicare for all to the floor for a vote. They had more items here. Let's go on. There's Kevin McCarthy looking like a simp. Okay. McCarthy spoke to the group in a conference call on Sunday. Politico and CNN reported the House GOP then announced several concessions in a provisional rules package. Now listen to this. However, 9 lawmakers said in a letter that they will continue to be, that there continue to be missing commitments with respect to virtually every component of our treaties, and no means to measure whether promises are kept or broken. They were even willing to make sure that he put something in the concessions that would make sure that he actually would keep the promise. You see how this works? They made demands, and then they said, wait a second, you say you agree to this. We need something in writing that shows that you're not going to break this promise. They were even willing to go that far. The Democrats weren't even willing to go. The progressives are just willing to take Joe Biden at his word. They were just willing to take Nancy Pelosi at her word. Well, they said they're going to fight for us. They said they're going to push for this. They're just taking it a word. They wouldn't even push back like this. They didn't push at all, but they weren't even willing to push back and add that extra step. Let's go on. The letter was signed by Representative Scott Perry, Paul Gosar, Dan Bishop, Chip Roy, Andy Harris, Andrew Clyde, and Representative-elect Andy Ogles, Anna Paulina Luna, and Eli Crane. Political reporter Olivia Beaver tweeted the full text of the letter here. Almost 10 Republicans who haven't said how they plan to vote on January 3rd write in a new letter, despite some progress achieved. Mr. McCarthy's statement comes almost impossibly late to address continued deficiencies ahead of the opening of the 118th Congress on January 3rd. So what was interesting here as well was that they acknowledged that, I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back to the thing here. They acknowledged that there was some progress that was achieved throughout their agreement with Kevin McCarthy, but then they go on to say that it wasn't enough. That's how you play hardball. That's how you play hardball. Let's go on. With the vote looming on Tuesday, it's unclear whether McCarthy has the support he needs, which has emboldened some lawmakers to seek considerable influence over the rules package that governs the position. Among the rules being thrashed out is the procedure for ousting a House Speaker, something that some conservative hardliners want to make far easier. Currently, the threshold to force a floor vote on vacating the Speaker's chair is a party majority. On Sunday's call, McCarthy agreed to set the threshold to 5 lawmakers, but some GOP hardliners want that figure to be as low as 1 person. Matt Gaetz, who has long opposed McCarthy for Speaker, indicated he might waver if McCarthy made a credible offer of a 1-person threshold. So even then, at this point, Matt Gaetz was willing to waver a little bit if he changed it to 1 person. After a poorer than expected showing in the 2022 midterm elections, the Republican Party holds a thin majority in the House, 222, 213, giving each Republican lawmaker considerable influence. Well. Other concessions from McCarthy include a promise to make sure committees closely reflect the ideological makeup of our conference. McCarthy has also promised to set up a House Judiciary Select Subcommittee in order to scrutinize the weaponization of the federal government. The demand comes amid stated Republican concerns over the politicization of federal agencies and is expected to hone in on the Biden administration. So these are just some of the things that they were requesting of Kevin McCarthy there. And they weren't really playing around here. Now, as you know, or as you may not know, that vote did happen today. The young woman in the CNN clip was correct. It did go multiple rounds. And we are now past the third round. Listen to this, because this is interesting. Republican McCarthy heads for defeat in third U.S. House Speaker vote. So this was when they were going right into the third round. This is crazy, right? Republican Kevin McCarthy's bid to become Speaker of the House ran into trouble in a series of votes on Tuesday. Who would have thunk? As hardline conservatives rebelled against him, leaving the new Republican majority in turmoil in what would prove to be a brutal slowdown between hardliners and the overwhelming majority of House Republicans. McCarthy twice fell short of the 218 vote majority needed to succeed Democrat Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. It was the first time in a century that the House failed to elect a speaker on the first vote. And that could have been us. That could have been the progressives in the House forcing the vote against Nancy Pelosi. These would be the headlines about them right now. Those would have been the headlines about, look at the squad holding firm, asking Nancy Pelosi for some concessions and not just agreeing to vote for her just because they're a part of her party. That was the whole point, right? The whole point of Justice Democrats. Let's go on. McCarthy also appeared to lack enough support as the voting went into a third round on Tuesday afternoon, with at least 20 Republicans voting for popular conservative representative Jim Jordan to try to block McCarthy, even though Jordan did not put himself forward as a candidate. He sure didn't. And I wouldn't say that Jim Jordan would be any better. Jim Jordan is the same one who kept things pretty hush about the sex scandal from the Ohio wrestling team. Jim Jordan knew about that. Let's all remember. So let me tell you how this is. You see how this is working? Jim Jordan didn't even have to bring himself forward. He was recommended. I'm going to show you where the recommendation came from. He was recommended. And just like that, 20 Republicans said, actually, I'm willing to support Jim instead of Kevin McCarthy. I mean, I can't make this up. I can't. You see what happens sometimes? Sometimes all it takes is a few, 4 or 5 people or a squad to put that pressure to get other people to jump on board and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we do have other options here. Just because Kevin McCarthy was the one that was selected doesn't mean we have to vote for him. Maybe we should push someone else forward. See how that works? Now, McCarthy showed no sign of withdrawing from the contest after the second ballot. We stay in it until we win. It will eventually change. Has it? Let's see what happened after that. Let's see what happened after that. Because here is the results after the third round. Now, this is from Now This. Listen to this, you guys. Third time was not the charm. The House was expected to vote for a fourth time after Kevin McCarthy once again failed to secure enough votes for House Speaker. Let's go ahead and cue up this beautiful bean footage.
McCarthy. Gomez. Jeffries.
And pause. So as you could see, right there, when we get to the end, at this point, it was 210 votes for Hakeem Jeffries, 202 for McCarthy, and 20. Those are the 20 votes there for Jim Jordan. Notice there's no present or others here. Notice nobody votes present when it's something like this. That's really interesting, right? Interesting, huh? Of course, AOC had to make her spotlight. She had to make sure she's seen. 20 for Jim Jordan. So this is, look, what can I say, you guys? What can I say? The comments are really funny, by the way. LOL. Now, how did Jim Jordan's name get brought up to begin with? Let's hear about this this speech here from Matt Gaetz, because he's actually the one that put this in motion. Matt Gaetz basically did what we would have wanted AOC to do in reference to Nancy Pelosi. Listen to this.
Florida, rise.
To nominate a candidate for Speaker of the House.
The gentleman is recognized.
Well, sometimes we have to do jobs that we don't really want to do. And sometimes we have to do jobs that we are called to do. And so, my colleagues, I rise to nominate the most talented, hardest working member of the Republican conference, who just gave a speech with more vision than we have ever heard from the alternative. I'm nominating Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan is humble, perhaps today, humble to a fault.
Did you see the way that he did that? Look at the watch the way he does this. Watch the courage.
Hardest working member of the Republican conference, who just gave a speech with more vision than we have ever heard from the alternative. I'm nominating Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan is humble, perhaps today, humble to a fault. Maybe the right person for the job of Speaker of the House isn't someone who wants it so bad. Maybe the right person for the job of Speaker of the House isn't someone who has sold shares of themselves for more than a decade to get it.
Why couldn't AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, Ilhan Omar, why couldn't any of them have made the same kind of speech against Nancy Pelosi? Look at the way he just stood up and said it. If he was afraid, he didn't come across afraid. Look at that, the boldness. Why couldn't they do that? Why couldn't they do that? No guts at all.
Maybe Jim Jordan is the right person for Speaker of the House because he is not beholden to the lobbyists and special interests who have corrupted this place and corrupted this nation under the leadership of both Republicans and Democrats.
There we go with progressive line. This is exactly what I've been trying to warn you guys about. Look who's using some of the same rhetoric that Bernie Sanders has used, that the progressives in the House have used. He's saying the same thing. The corruption, the lobbyists. How dare you listen, Jamal Bowman, because I'm going to show you something from him too. Jamal Bowman, AOC. How dare you let Matt Gaetz take this message? How dare you? Such a mess. Listen to this. Call out the corruption.
Who have corrupted this place and corrupted this nation under the leadership of both Republicans and Democrats.
Republicans and Democrats. You notice he mentioned both. Jesus. This should be an utmost embarrassing moment for the squad. Very embarrassing moment. Let's go on.
Maybe Jim Jordan would be the right person for Speaker of the House because he wouldn't fight us when we try to get a term limits bill on the floor. Maybe Jim Jordan would be the right person because he wouldn't fight us when we try to put a balanced budget on the floor and vote for it. And maybe Jim Jordan is the right person because he would endorse the plan that was built by the Texas delegation to finally secure our border. Mr. Jordan said in his nomination that there are certain bills that we have to pass to fix the problem. The challenge is the alternative has been someone voting for the very bills that have caused these problems.
Oh no, how dare he call out the way that people vote on these bills? AOC, I'm looking at you. Rashida Tlaib, I'm looking at you. Ilhan Omar, I'm looking at you, because you guys don't call out the way that some of your colleagues in the Democratic Party have been voting against bills that affected legislation. Hell, you guys don't even vote that way sometimes. Isn't this interesting? Do you guys feel like we're living in a Twilight episode? I feel like I'm living in an episode of the Twilight Zone. That's what it feels like right now. And I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for Rod Sterling to walk through the door and say, "You have entered the fifth dimension." Just waiting for that. Hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened.
Mr. Jordan says that we cannot accept legislation like the omnibus, and I fully agree. And if Jim Jordan were Speaker of the House, if he were the leader of the Republican team, we wouldn't have that circumstance choking the economy of our country, increasing inflation, and diminishing the prospects of a better life for our fellow Americans. And finally, Mr. Jordan said we must engage in rigorous oversight. Every one of my Republican colleagues knows that the person who can lead that oversight effort, who works on it every day, who has the skill and the talent and the will, is Jim Jordan. I'm nominating him, and I'm voting for him.
For someone, considering the allegations that he's had brought against him, well, they say that he can't be charged with it, whatever. But the allegations that he's had brought against him in reference to trafficking underage girl, the fact that he just stood up like that with no fear, no qualms about it, even though he's in the minority in reference to supporting Kevin McCarthy, it was just like he didn't even care. You know, it's just almost like this instinct that he had that I really don't care what people are going to say about me and my party. This is how I feel, and this is what I'm standing up for. Does that sound familiar to you? Isn't that what we told the squad to do? Not care what the other establishments were saying in their party and to fight for the principles and the morals that they signed up and they pledged to? Isn't what that was they were supposed to do, right? Now, somebody asked this question for me. Answer this question. Why is it that he can do it? And not just him, but the other Republicans that refuse to support Kevin McCarthy. Why is it that they can do so without that same type of fear? But we can't even get the squad to vote together on a piece of legislation as a block when it actually matters. I want to know the answer to that. If you are watching and you're conservative, I know some of you are conservative. If you're watching and you're conservative, please tell me or explain this to me tonight on the call-in. Tell me why those 20 people that voted for Jim Jordan, tell me why they don't have that same type of fear. Tell me. I would really like to know. Now, this goes on because Glenn Greenwald had something to say about this too. And we haven't even gotten to the Glenn Greenwald story just yet. But he had something to say about this because, you know, Jamal Bowman and his corny self, he decided to make a joke about this situation with Kevin McCarthy's speakership. So Jamal Bowman goes on to say, GOP leader doesn't have the votes. We're in a good mood. Now, here's Jamal Bowman in the picture here. I think that's Summer Lee and other Democrat politicians. We're in a good mood. This message is coming from Jamal Bowman, guys. It's coming from Jamal Bowman. GOP leader doesn't have the votes. Let's talk about this for a second. This has to be one of the most clownish gestures and tweets that I've seen from Jamal Bowman. Why is that? Why is Jamal Bowman bragging about the GOP not having the votes for Kevin McCarthy when we ask people like Jamal Bowman and other members of the squad to do the same damn thing for Nancy Pelosi? See, this is Jamal Bowman showing his true colors without realizing that he's doing it. He puts out some tweets sometimes, and I don't even think he thinks before he tweets these things. Why is he cheering that on? Why is he making fun of it? Look, doesn't have the votes. We're in a good mood. Why are you making fun of that, Jamal Bowman? That's what we told you to do. This is exactly what we asked you to do. So the joke's on you, because here you have Republicans who are willing to force the vote against the candidate for Speaker for House, which you weren't willing to do. So the joke is on you, dummy. Now, Glenn Greenwald had something to say about this as well, because this made no sense to me. I'm like, is he really that tone deaf? So Glenn Greenwald goes on to say, the GOP holdouts are doing what the squad never had the courage to do. Use their power to defy party leadership in order to extract concessions. Not sure why. It's a source of pride to show how you always submit to party orders like good soldiers. Not much dignity in that. Yes, spot on, because this right here is Glenn Greenwald letting you know that Jamal Bowman is revealing himself in a way that lets you know at the end of the day, he was going to back the Democratic Party regardless, boo. This whole idea of him running as a progressive to push back against the Democratic Party establishment, that was never going to happen, guys. That's Jamal Bowman letting you know he was always going to back his party, regardless. He had no intention of holding his vote for Nancy Pelosi, even though he alluded to that on CNN, him and Cori Bush. They gave people this idea, this tiny bit of hope that maybe we will not vote for her. You guys will have to wait and see. But there's Jamal Bowman revealing his damn self, letting you know right then and there that was never his intention. He was always going to back his party and support the party regardless. And he had no intention of pushing back on Democrat establishment. Jamal Bowman is a party loyalist. I'm going to stop calling him progressive. He need to stop calling his own self progressive. I've told you guys this before. Out of all the people, all the squad members, Jamal Bowman is the weakest link. Now, let's go on, because Breonna Joy Gray called this out as well. She said it's wild to be listening mainstream coverage of how Republicans are forcing the vote and how the far right is getting major concessions because Republicans can only afford to lose 4 votes when the left was patronized relentlessly for pointing out the squad could do the same. All those people who criticize the force the vote town hall, the strategy, which comes straight from the DSA handbook, all of those people who criticize this strategy, do you see it working now? Because see, the strategy does work. Now they see that. Now, some people already know are going to double down because they look kind of foolish now to come back and say, oh, damn, force the vote was right. I should have participated in that force the vote town hall after all. Some people have too much pride to do that. So some of them are not going to come back and say it. So I'll say it for them. You were wrong. You were dead wrong. It does work. And this time it's working, but it's working for the Republican Party. Because you see, they're able to pick away at Kevin McCarthy to get what they want and what they need. The few squad members, they couldn't even ask for one thing: the vote for Medicare for all. People act like we were asking for a kidney. People act like we were asking, go ask Nancy Pelosi if she'll give us a kidney and if she'll give us a will. All we asked for was a vote. They couldn't even do that. Spineless, weak, pathetic sellouts. That's what they are. Now you tell me, how is it that someone like Matt Gaetz, who is also corporate, who is also corrupt, how he can take that same damn strategy from the DSA handbook and use it to get what he wants on the Republican side of things? But the people who come from DSA themselves, who are part of the DSA organization, those squad members, they can't even follow their own handbook. Make it make sense. I'm going to go to some of the comments. It's a hot mess. Mike says, if you force the vote, McCarthy will become speaker. Mike, I'll never forget it. Mike, I'll never forget it. Jeez. Good cookies. Yeah, but what does the parliamentarian think of this Sabby? We all know that their opinion is infallible. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Kimberly. Mary says the entire system is theater of distraction. In the end, the oligarchs that own these people make the decisions. Thank you for the super chat, Zach, the Celtics guy. Guess who blocked me on Sunday? Anna Kasparian, LOL. She's blocked me too. Yeah. I don't even know why she blocked me. I don't even think I ever even spoke to Anna. Adam says that money hard to say no to, Sabby. They don't care about any of us. They have great health care. They do. Sebastian, all they want is the benefits that comes with being a politician, like book deals, subsidies from podcasts, and etc. They got those benefits, boo. Let's go to those comments on Rockfin. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. I just checked Twitter. Jink ain't speak in 3 days. A man who usually got something to say about everything. Cedar is still on vacay. Hasn't tweeted since the second week of December. Time for the ratio bum rush, y'all. Grim tweeted 2 minutes ago trying to say he never said that and he was always for force the vote. I said, didn't Bree had to convince you in a debate that Kevin wouldn't become speaker? Time voters use leverage. Yeah, I think Ryan Grimm needs to go back and look at his tweets. He needs to go back. He did say he did not support it. So we need to go back and find that episode, that Jimmy Dore episode that Ryan Grimm was on when he said he didn't support it. So that's that. What's that assured? Jimmy Dore called them out today. This is crazy. This shit is crazy, man. Oh, man. Okay. Moving on to our next story. Glenn Greenwald brought up an interesting point. He's connecting class with selling out. Now, this connects to Maxwell Frost. And I want to make a point here first before we get into this story. Selling out. Sometimes when you sell out, most of the time when you sell out, works out great for people financially, or it helps their celebrity status. But every now and then, there comes a person that will sell out and the exact opposite happens. And that person is Maxwell Frost. Because you see, Maxwell Frost decided to sell out his beliefs and support for the Palestinian-led movement in order to get a seat in Congress. And then only to get there and to not be able to afford to live there. Let's get into it. Let's do the damn thing, son. So Glenn Greenwald says, amazing, but not surprising. New progressive icon Maxwell Frost spent years as a pro-Palestinian activist. To run for Congress, he repudiated and reversed his views on Israel, cheered by Richie Torres and crypto money, enraging local activists. Now let's get into that, and I'm going to come back to the other thing that Glenn says here, because there's something I want to point out. How Florida progressive Maxwell Frost courted Palestinians, then abandoned them. Oh, we're calling it all out tonight. I'm holding nothing back. It's a new year, and I don't care. We're getting into it. Now listen to this. I'm only going to read a snippet from this. Okay. And I think I'm going to make this bigger because, yes. Frost was embedded in local Palestinian activist circles and was even in a group chat with all the pro-Palestinian organizers in the Orlando area. He had signed the Palestinian Feminist Pledge, which calls for supporting the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement, ending military aid to Israel, and rejecting the conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. He also signed a similar pledge from the Florida Palestine Network, FPN, a local grassroots group of pro-Palestinian advocates that was sent to Congress, that was sent to Congresswoman Val Demings. The lawmaker Frost is now set to replace come November. A copy of both pledges seen by MEE shows Frost's name among the signatories. So when FPN learned of his decision to run for Congress, they were all in support of him. Listen to this part. I had initially felt great about Maxwell as a candidate. There didn't seem to be any question about his views on Palestine. I was ready to fully support him. He was a grassroots organizer and was in the streets with us every single day. Now that is coming from Lamia, who was an organizer in Florida. Now, however, over the course of the next year, Frost began to receive more support on a national scale, as well as influx of pro-Israel endorsements and corporate money from a crypto PAC that was spending heavily against candidates critical of Israel. Several organizers who spoke to Middle East Eye shared their experiences of working for and supporting Frost because of his grassroots beginnings, only to have Frost later come out with the position paper that reneged on many of the promises he made to local activists. Dude had already started to renege on promises before he even got elected. Now, let's go back to This piece here, because I want to go into more of what Glenn says here about Maxwell Frost and this situation in general. The nexus of SBF and Sean McEllie and Richie Torres has been partially told, but only partially. Torres, the pure case of what AOC called a Trojan horse, is being groomed for higher office. Every identity box weaponized to advance his Israel fixation and status quo power. In case you forgot, listen to this.
On through. So what is your position just generally on that identity politics debate, and what role do you think it ought to have for voters in the 14th congressional district when deciding who they should vote for?
It's an excellent question, because sometimes people throw this term around, identity politics, and a lot of people, when they use that term, they'll all mean something different. And so in terms of using the term identity politics as vote for me, I am XYZ, to use that as the sole basis for voting for someone, I think is incorrect, and it's flawed, because, you know, there are a lot of, I think, I mean, there are a lot of Trojan horses. You know, there are a lot of folks that say, vote for me, I am this intersection of different identities, but at the same time, they still try to advance or are primarily financed by special interests. So it doesn't necessarily get us to where we need to be.
And that is actually what Richie Torres did. That's exactly what he did. Vote for me. I'm this, and this, instead of focusing on policy per se. Now, Glenn Greenwald goes on to say, on the bickering over Frost's inability to rent a DC apartment in Brazil, members are giving absurdly large state apartments in Brasilia or rent supplements. U.S. members have larger salaries, but it's vital we have non-rich elected officials who keep roots in their districts. Let's talk about this for a second. This is on purpose. You see, there's a reason why we don't have many people that are working class going to Congress. Most people who want to win have to quit their job in order to win. To run a successful, full-scale, launched campaign that has a chance of winning, you need to quit your job. Some of you may not want to hear this, but it's true. Most people who are working class and poor can't afford to do it. That was one of the things that Maxwell Frost complained about. He was like, I had to quit my job if I ever had a shot at winning. So he lost money, right? This is also why mainly people who are upper middle class and people who are wealthy are the ones who end up running for office. A lot of the PMCs, the professional managerial class, they're usually the ones that run. Why do you think a lot of the politicians in Congress are former lawyers? They have the money by that time in their career. They usually have the money saved up or put aside for them to be able to make a successful run. So keep that in mind. The system isn't broken. The system is designed to keep working class and poor people out. They don't want people like Maxwell Frost there. Just keeping it real with you. So let's talk about selling out, because Maxwell Frost did do that. He decided to sell out the Palestinian people so that he would not have large PAC money from AIPAC come up against him and prevent him from winning that race. So he sold out the Palestinian people to go to DC to do this job, to be a part of Congress. And then you get there and you can't even get a home where you're supposed to work. You can't get an apartment because of the credit situation. And there's no shame on bad credit. It happens. But what I'm saying is this: he sold out a whole population of people and a movement to get to a place in DC to be in Congress where he can't even afford to live. Think about it, people. Yeah, he won. Yeah, he's there, but the city don't even want to rent to him. His most recent statement was, I think I'll just have to couch surf. You guys believe in this shit? You sold out for this? And if you don't believe me, I'm not the only one who's brought this up. Because believe it or not, even Counterpoints brought it up. Listen to this.
Speaking of Israel, what point do you want to make today?
So in May of 2021, in the midst of the Gaza war, protests were held around the country. In Orlando, anti-war activists assembled downtown for a rally and a march and were joined by Maxwell Frost, an organizer who later went on to win the Democratic nomination for the area's congressional seat. It's a heavily blue seat, so he's heading to Congress. Here he is.
And like I said, the last thing I'm going to say again, and y'all can hear me say this over and over again, we have to demand, not ask, we have to demand that our leaders see the world through the eyes of the most vulnerable.
So that is Maxwell Frost right there. And this is a Palestinian-led action here. Okay? You see how people can just, this is why I told you guys, how you going to hold people accountable? You see how people can just flip just like that?
And use that vision to make every goddamn decision they ever make. Thank you.
Frost was an active member of the group that organized that march, Florida Palestine Network. And once he started his run for Congress, according to multiple sources I spoke to for a story just published in The Intercept, AIPAC and an allied organization, Democratic Majority for Israel, took extreme interest in his pro-Palestinian activism.
Took extreme interest in his pro-Palestinian activism. So he was already going to be a target. They were already targeting him. And instead of doing the right thing and upholding his standards here, he sold out. Listen to it.
In January, DMFI endorsed his opponent, Randolph Bracey, who expected to get big money spent on the outside to support him. But that money never came. Over the ensuing months, Frost, according to sources on his campaign, worked hard to moderate his position on Israel-Palestine in order to keep that big money and the big money pro-Israel groups from spending him into the ground. He also landed his own super PAC support from crypto billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried, whose super PAC Protect Our Future spent $1 million on his behalf. By the end of the campaign, Frost had significantly evolved his position. He had begun as a supporter of BDS, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, and is a movement that tries to pressure Israel to end its settlement activity and its occupation of Palestinian territory. He ended by severely criticizing BDS as, quote, extremely problematic.
He ended with criticizing BDS as extremely problematic. How you go from being an organizer with the Palestinian movement to then criticizing the movement when you knew damn well what was going on. You were already a part of the organization. You knew the history. You knew the cultural history. You knew what was happening to the Palestinian people. How could you turn your back on them like that? Because it's one thing if you don't know and you're just listening to what mainstream media is saying. He knew.
Quote, I believe that the boycott, sanctions, and divestment movement is extremely problematic and undermines the chances of peace and a two-state solution. Additionally, it hurts both Palestinians and Israelis who suffer economically from it. Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine have been designated by the United States as terrorist organizations, and all these groups are a part of the Central BDS Movement's Council, he said, which in my eye delegitimizes the entire organization and movement, unquote.
And just like that, Maxwell Frost caved. Turned his back on a whole entire population of people just so he could get a win, so he could get into DC. And then he got there, and now you can't even stay. Like, now you got there, you have no place to live. Was it worth it? In the end, was it really worth it? Now, Glenn goes on to say, in 2010, the GOP, led by Karl Rove, attacked a Tea Party insurgent for difficulty paying her college debt and other consumer debt. I wrote then about how gross that was, since that's most Americans' experience not being born a Bush. He goes on to say, it is not easy for Congress members both to keep a home in one's district and a place in DC. We just usually don't hear about it because Congress is filled with rich people who get richer in office. Frost's struggle is common in the US. Paul Ryan boasted of sleeping in his office. So I think the point that Glenn is trying to point out here, and I think what we need to focus on is the class struggle here, is the sense that, again, there are certain systems in this country that are designed to keep working class people and poor people out. And it seems like the only way that they get an opportunity with those positions is if they're the help. You know, it's like, yeah, I worked at the White House. I was a maid. Yeah, I worked at the White House. I was a janitor. Yes, I worked at the White House. I was a butler. I was the caterer. I was the groundskeeper. You see where I'm going with this? It's like you're only allowed to be in certain positions when you come from that type of class. But once you try to get into these PMC, these elevated positions, then you are seen as suspect. You're given a side eye, and you may not even be able to afford to live there. But what I want you to understand is that it's all on purpose. So if you can see here, I want to show you what Glenn is pointing out here when he talks about Paul Ryan boasted sleeping in his office. You'll see this here. If you look even in the Senate, I'm one of the very few people in there who doesn't have a net worth over $1 million. That came from former Senator Russ Feingold. Isn't this crazy? These people are rich. This is what I've been trying to tell people. People are like, they're not rich. They're just elected officials. Bullshit. Look up their net worth. A lot of those senators got bank, you guys. So that's an example that Glenn is pointing to there. And he goes on to say, as poor as Russ Feingold is relative to colleagues in the Senate, as poor as Russ Feingold is relative to his colleagues in the Senate, he's still a Harvard Law School graduate who owns his own home and has earned in excess of $100,000 as a U.S. Senator for the last 18 years. So even though Russ was poorer than his other Senate comrades, he was still a Harvard Law graduate, and he was still making six figures. You see what everybody following me here? So I think that this is something that is really important that we really need to focus on. We need to pay more attention to. Because at the end of the day, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And so some people didn't like what I said when we had the panel on New Year's Eve, and I said they wanted this idea of dump the incumbents, and they said, let's get all these independent candidates and get 400 of the people in Congress out in 2 years. And I said, number one, that's not going to be realistic. I'm all for third parties and independent candidates. I would not be voting Democrat or Republican. But with a 2-year time frame, the main thing that you have to focus on is getting corporate money out of politics. The response that I got was, well, you put those people in and that's how you get the corporate money out. We need to talk about the corporate money that happens during these campaigns. You need to talk about these PACs like AIPAC that come in and they put all this money up against these candidates, especially the ones that are running in support of Palestinians, and prevent those candidates from even getting their name out there and even winning in the first damn place. It was hard enough for someone like Nina Turner, and though she made mistakes of her own with her campaign, money came in at her. So we have to talk about the class issue. We have to talk about the class issue. It keeps a lot of people back. And in that sense, one of the things that we talk about a lot at RBN is that class is race and race is class. And that brings us to the next story, which is about reparations. Now, this is interesting. You know, I didn't think Tim Pool and Benedict Cumberbatch would be in the same sentence here, but they are. because both of them have a reparations story right now. If you're not familiar with Benjamin, I want to call him Benjamin, with Benedict Cumberbatch. Benedict, he's known to us Marvel fans as Doctor Strange. Some of you may know him from other movies. But recently, something came out about his family in reference to reparations. Let's get into that story. Benedict Cumberbatch's family could be forced to pay reparations for ancestors to slaves. This explains the shocking picture of him on the thumbnail, the face I put up there. So that's Benedict Cumberbatch. So let's get into this story here. I was not aware of this, by the way, until someone sent me this article. The family of Benedict Cumberbatch could be forced to pay reparations for slavery after it was revealed he has familial ties to a sugar plantation in Barbados. See this piece right here that I want to point out? This is why, and I don't know if JB's still here in the chat, but we need to talk about this. Sugar plantation in Barbados. There were plantations not just in the United States. Let's go on. The Caribbean nation, which became a republic in 2021, is looking for reparations from the families of past slave owners, and Cumberbatch could find himself in a legal battle over his ancestors owning a plantation in the 18th and the 19th century. So let's go on. According to the report in The Telegraph, Abraham Cumberbatch, the seventh great-grandfather of the Oscar-nominated actor, bought the Cleveland plantation in 1728, which housed 250 slaves for more than 100 years. Cumberbatch relatives reportedly earned the family a small fortune from the plantation. After slavery was abolished in the 1830s, Cumberbatch ancestors and other slave owners were compensated with a monetary amount now worth millions. Let's say this again, you guys. Cumberbatch's ancestors and other slave owners were compensated with a monetary amount now worth millions. This is the point that some people bring up when they say, don't forget, some slave owners actually did get reparations. A lot of people don't know this, but some of them did after slavery was abolished. It was supposed to be 40 acres and a mule. According to General Sherman, at least in the United States, that was actually supposed to go to the free slaves. But instead, some slave owners got reparations instead. Let's go on. Last November, The Guardian reported that the Barbados government had indicated its plans to seek reparations from Richard Drax, a conservative member of British Parliament who inherited the island's largest plantation, Drax Hall. Drax is facing pressure to hand over his family's land if he refuses. Barbados will ask an international arbitration court to decide on the matter. The Drax family had slave ships. They had agents in the African continent and kidnapped Black African people to work on their plantations here in Barbados. I have no doubt that what would have motivated them was that they never perceived us to be equal to them, that we were human beings. They considered us as chattels. That's where the term chattel slavery comes from. If Barbados' challenge is successful in court, it will pave the way for its government to seek compensation from other descendants of slave owners, including Cumberbatch. This is at its earliest stages. We are just beginning. A lot of this history is only really now coming to light. Any descendants of white plantation owners who have benefited from the slave trade should be asked to pay reparations, including the Cumberbatch family. In other words, they're letting Benedict know you are not special, boo. The money should be used to turn the local clinic into a hospital, support local schools, and improve infrastructure and housing. Jesus, and it gets worse. Listen to this part. I forgot he was in this movie. Cumberbatch, who played an enslaver in the Oscar-winning film 12 Years a Slave, has acknowledged his ancestors' slave ownership in the past. He said his role in the 2006 abolitionist drama Amazing Grace was a sort of apology for his ancestry. Pew. The Sherlock star also said in a 2007 interview that his mother once urged him to reconsider using his real name for the fear he would become a target for descendants of slaves looking for reparations. Isn't this something? In 2014, Stacey Cumberbatch, New York's commissioner of citywide administrative services, was asked about her surname, revealing that her ancestors were slaves in Barbados, owned by the Emmy winner's forefathers. Okay. That might be a bit heavy for some folks. But I'm sitting here, and as I was reading this, I'm thinking to myself, like, I should have asked Olamide Lauren to come on because she's from Barbados. Oh, wait, no, she's from Bahamas. Is Barbados or Bahamas? Damn, I forgot. I'll have to ask. I should have had someone come on. If you know someone that's from Barbados, please let me know because I can have them on to come and talk about this. But so Benedict is taking some heat because of that, because that came out. I was shocked. I did not know about that until I saw that article. And so it brings up that question again in reference to reparations. Now, where the debate comes in is that whether or not reparations should be based on lineage or whether it should be based on race. The problem that you run into if you just base it on race, if you say all Black Americans should receive reparations, the problem that you might run into is the fact that the 14th Amendment can actually prevent that from happening, because the 14th Amendment can say, that's discriminatory. If you base it on lineage, that's a different thing. And so if we want to go back to the point about Barbados, see, I wanted to let you guys know it wasn't just plantations in the United States. There were plantations in the Caribbean too. So if you want to go back to Barbados, what some people would probably tell you, and again, I'm not an expert, just telling the story here, but what some people will probably tell you is that technically Britain should pay reparations to Barbados. So it was Bahamas. I got it wrong. She has lineage from Bahamas and Nigeria. Olamide, that's what it is. Bahamas, not Barbados. Balls. Sorry. But, and that brings up the Tim Pool issue here, because I'm going to show you this tweet and I want you to tell me if you think Tim Pool is being genuine. So Tim Pool tweeted this out recently. Stop sending U.S. money to Ukraine and use it to pay reparations to descendants of slaves. I'm going to say this again. Tim Pool said, stop sending U.S. money to Ukraine and use it to pay reparations to descendants of slaves. Now, the question that some people are asking, is Tim Pool being genuine? Do you think he's being genuine? We're going to talk about that tonight when you call in to call in. I want to hear your opinion about all of this. But some people may agree with this part. Stop sending U.S. money to Ukraine. I think a lot of us have vented about that, right? But where some people will fall off is when he says use it to pay reparations to the descendants of slaves. I agree with all of this message. All of it. $100 billion has been sent to Ukraine, but they say they can't afford to pay reparations for descendants of slavery. And it's not just that. They say they can't give us health care. It's too expensive. We can't afford it. But you just sent $100 billion to Ukraine. That money been sitting there. If you cut the military industrial complex, we can solve a lot of these things. Now, some people will come in, and this is where they'll ask me, by the way, you need to look at the comments on them. You need to look at the comments because I don't think Tim's audience was having this. I don't think they were feeling it. Well, some people will come in and say, what about the rest of us? What about people who are poor that are not, a part of that lineage to receive reparations? What about us? What will we get? What do we do? This is the reason why I say it is really important. I wish Andrew Yang would still come back and stress this much more. This is why I think it's really important that you guys need to push for universal basic income. And before people come back at me and they say, no, we can't have that. That's socialism. I want to let you know that Alaska has a UBI, and Alaska is a red state. They get their UBI. Why I keep saying that? They get their UBI from the oil industry. So, because see, this is the thing when people come back and they tell me that, they're like, that's a socialist thing and da-da-da. I'm like, Alaska has UBI. So maybe this is something that we have a better chance accomplishing on the local level. These things are happening. I talked to you about programs in Denver, Colorado, and Los Angeles that are actually doing a test run on a UBI for certain participants to see how that works out. Maybe that would be the way to go. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen on the national level. Maybe in reference to reparations, maybe that's what may happen, because I don't think it's going to happen on the national level unless you put heavy pressure on the president of the United States. HR 40 has been sitting there for what, over 30 years? Jim Clyburn was a part of that, right? That's not going anywhere. And HR 40 doesn't offer cash payments based on what I read. Now, you still need those structural changes. You still need to change the system, but you also need to pay people because there's this gap in wealth. And that's what I want to bring up here, where people need to understand why we need reparations for Black Americans. And there's one piece here that I want to point out that really nails it, because I think some people, they just see this as, you're just giving money to Black people. And I don't really understand why, it is. So let me point out one part from here. The average white family has roughly 10 times the amount of wealth as the average Black family. White college graduates have over 7 times more wealth than Black college graduates. Making the American dream an equitable reality demands the same. U.S. government that denied wealth to Blacks restore that deferred wealth through reparations to their descendants in the form of individual cash payments in the amount that will close the Black-white racial wealth divide. Additionally, reparations should come in the form of Black wealth building opportunities that address racial disparities in education, housing, and business ownership. And let me say something really quick here, because people get this one wrong too. This rumor that was going around where people were saying that canceling student loan debt closes the racial wealth gap, it does not. I've mentioned this on this show when people were saying that last year. It does not. The majority of African Americans don't have college loan debt because the majority of African Americans don't have college degrees. The majority of African Americans are getting jobs after high school, not going to college. Yes, the rates have increased over the years where more Black people are going to college. But overall, the majority of Black people don't have student loan debt. So I don't know who started that rumor. I don't like where it came from, but I have to clear that up. I had to jump in and clear that shit up. I'm sorry. That is not true. All right. Now, there's another piece here where they lay out the different categories, the missed opportunities. The first major opportunity the U.S. had and where it should have atoned for slavery was right after the Civil War. General William Sherman concluded that each Black family should receive 40 acres. Sherman signed Field Order 15 and allocated 400,000 acres of confiscated federal land to Black families. Additionally, some families were to receive mules left over from the war. Hence, that's where 40 acres and a mule comes from. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. That's why it's not as common for Black Americans to have generational wealth. You get what I'm saying? You don't have property, then you have no property to pass down. So that's important to note, especially then land was valuable. Now, another part here they mention is the New Deal. And I've talked about this on this show as well. A lot of people like to brag about being this FDR New Deal Democrat. But I like to remind you that the New Deal heavily left out African Americans. And people don't want to hear it, but it's true. I've done the research on this. So that's another thing. Two particular policies of the New Deal fell short on redressing America's racial wrongs: the GI Bill and Social Security. Though white and Black Americans fought in World War II, Black veterans could not redeem their post-war benefits like their white peers. While the GI Bill was mandated federally, it was implemented locally. The presence of racial housing convents and redlining among local municipalities prohibited Blacks from utilizing federal benefits. White soldiers were afforded the opportunity to build wealth by sending themselves and their children to college and by obtaining housing and small business grants. That's important. But that wasn't the part I wanted to show you as well. Oh, the anti-Black policies. And if I don't find it here, I know it off the top of my head. I forgot how long this article was. I'm sorry. Eric, can you put the link to this article in the chat? Because some people might want to read this, because they even talk about who should receive reparations. And then, oh, I lost it. It must have been towards the top. There was a piece here that listed all of the things that, oh, when they talk about slavery, here it is. All right, this piece right here, because a lot of times when you say reparations, people think that you're just talking about slavery. It's actually not just about slavery. Here are some of the issues that are brought up. Slavery, Jim Crow segregation, anti-Black practices like redlining and other discriminatory public policies in criminal justice and education have robbed Black Americans of the opportunities to build wealth, defined as assets minus debt afforded to their white peers. So there's a difference between net worth and income. Your net worth is what you own minus what you owe. If you don't have generational wealth, it's going to be difficult for you to get ownership. Not saying you can't get there, but it's going to be more difficult for you to get it. And then in order to get that wealth, if you're going to go to college and get higher education so that you can get those positions that's going to give you that wealth, 9 times out of 10, if you're coming from a generation that has no wealth, you're going to have to take out student loans. Now you have debt. So your net worth is what you own minus what you owe. If you owe a lot, but you don't own shit, your net worth is in the negative, boo. So this is something that's important for people to really hone in on. Net worth is very much important. Now, if you think that this is not an issue today, it still affects people today. And I'm going to show you with an example here in my place, Boston, Massachusetts. Even we had this issue. People like to say we're progressive and everyone's so free and no one cares about race or gender or sex up here. That's not true. We have systemic racial issues as well. Now, this came out a couple of years ago because the Boston Globe did a study about race in Boston. That was no typo. The median net worth of Black Bostonians is $8. Some of you heard me talk about this probably multiple times on this channel. I do have new subscribers now, but I want people to understand how important this really is. This was actually highlighted in the Globe's Spotlight series on race in Boston, and the $8 is 100% real. The median net worth for non-immigrant African-American households in the greater Boston region is $8. For white families, It was around 250K. And I want to point something out. Notice they say non-immigrant African-American households. Why is that important? Because the households, the immigrant African-American, the immigrant African households, 9 times out of 10 weren't descendants of slavery in the United States. They came here by choice. Most of them came, people I know here that are Jamaican, people that I know here that are Haitian, they came here by choice. They weren't born here. So that's why it's important that they point that piece out. This study was done about non-immigrant African Americans. $8. Now, how could that be? Let me explain to you how this works. Let's go back to white flight. For those who are not aware, white flight was a period when white families left the cities and moved to the suburbs. Some people said flee to the suburbs. They moved to the suburbs. Here's where the problem came. Because of redlining practices, Black families that did have the means to leave the city and to move to the suburbs were kept out, almost like a gate around those communities that kept Black families out. Now, how did they do that? The banks wouldn't give them loans, even when they could have. So what you have to understand is that for most of the Black families during white flight, they were kept in the urban areas. They were kept in Chicago. They were kept in the Bostons. They were kept in the Phillies. They were kept in the New York cities where they could not move out to the suburban areas. When the white families left the cities, the wealth and money that they had, they took it with them. So when the wealth moved out of the city and moved into the suburbs, and you have public schools funded by property taxes, guess what happened to the education system in the cities? It went down because of lack of resources, because it was underfunded, because property taxes determine how the funding is going to be for public schools. So now you have these schools in the city that actually at one point in time were fairly decent or good. But when the wealth left the city and the Black kids were left and some Latino kids were left in the city, they were left at the under-resourced, underfunded schools, therefore not getting as great of an education, therefore not getting as many opportunities in reference to higher education, therefore not getting more opportunities when it came to professional careers. Therefore, they became stuck in a cycle of poverty that was more and more difficult to get out of. And it's really difficult to own property in these cities. It's expensive to own in New York City, to own in Boston, right? So you don't own anything. Yeah, you live in the city, but they couldn't even move to the suburbs and buy a house. They couldn't even move because redlining kept them out. So those were other things that made it so that Black people were held back. Now, what's one way to fix that? I mentioned to you locally, there are some reparation task force that are happening. Let's hear a little bit about that. Now, this is from the GRIO.
The Boston City Council voted this month on developing a task force to discuss what reparations will look like for Black residents. The proposal will compensate Black families for the city's role in slavery and its impact of racial discrimination over the last century. According to the Associated Press, the task force members will research racial biases and disparities for Black families in Boston to decide what reparations will help the Black community the most. Boston is the latest city to look into reparations. The recent list includes Los Angeles, California, St. Louis, Missouri, Providence, Rhode Island, and Evanston, Illinois.
Okay, so I want to add this here for a second. So Boston is looking into reparations, which, given I told you about that $8 versus the $250K, they definitely should have been on that list a long time ago. But Boston is one of them. Los Angeles is another. CJ actually interviewed a woman who's a part of the Reparations Council in California. They mentioned Evanston, Illinois. I have looked into that one. That one seemed like it was more like a housing initiative than it was reparations. But then they also mentioned Providence, Rhode Island, which is another one, highly segregated, big wealth disparities there as well. Like, look, you got to live here to see it and to know it. But maybe this is the way forward. Maybe we have to look at this on the local level. Maybe it can happen faster that way. I want everyone to get this done on the national level. But I feel like you have presidents that don't support it. And even the most progressive candidate at the time, Bernie Sanders, did not support reparations for African Americans. But he signed off on legislation for his people. And I want to be very clear about that. This was something I did not like that Bernie Sanders did. He was willing to admit to sign off on legislation when it came to reparations for his people, but he did not agree with reparations for African Americans. And that really hit a nerve with me. So when it comes to the leaders in the United States, I don't see any of them wanting to do it. Any of them. So maybe the path forward is to look at it on the local level. What do you guys think? I want to hear from you tonight. We're going to talk about this on Call In. And do you think Tim Pool is being genuine? I don't know. Let's get into it. Eric, I'm ready whenever you are. I'm going to take a quick break before Call In. Let me move this out of the way. I'm going to move this picture out the way too, because I don't know what I did there. Yay. Yeah. And I think Eric, I think you put that article in the chat for people who want to see.
Yes.
I'm just going to take a quick break and I'll be right back.
All right. All right. How's everybody doing on our first show here in 2023? Let me get the call-in link, make sure that's in the chat, because shortly we're going to move to call-in for Sabby's call-in episode tonight, which is nominally on the Tim Pool call for reparations, but of course, once you're in call-in, you can feel free to really discuss anything you like, and you can get in call-in either hitting the link and doing it on your browser, or you can install the call-in app on your smartphone and you can go in that way. Let's see, we got some chats and some rock fins built up here, so I'm going to do a few of those before we call it quits here on YouTube and go to call-in. Let's hit those. There we go. From Dwayne, chattel slavery built the U.S. empire. Yep. And from Saul Good, talking about Tim Pool, saying he's trying to divide what he considers liberals, Black Americans versus wine mom Zelensky simps. This one made me laugh. Notorious saying, who's Tim Pool, or as she put it, Time Pool. But I don't know Tim Pool in a huge way, but I guess he's kind of a center-ish commentator. I've seen him on other shows once in a while. But we can talk about that in call-in as far as who is this dude, what's he about, should we be listening to him or what? From Angela, I agree with the message, but Tim Pool flat out says daily that he tweets things to get reactions, period. Thanks for that. And from Bryce, I don't know with Tim Pool, mixed messaging with him. He is a liberal. And Killier Gorgie's asking, what is under Tim Pool's beanie? Yeah, that's one of the things with Tim Pool. I think he's always wearing this beanie. And thanks for the super chat from Larez. Dr. S, I've come to bargain. Barbados, shut up and pay. I believe that's a Cumberbatch reference. And thanks for the super sticker, JM. And let's see here what we got on the Rockfins. We had some check-ins from Mr. Roger Meadows. Thanks for this tipped comment on Rockfin, Roger Meadows. The tweet I spoke about earlier regarding Grimm, he included in his appearance on Jimmy Dore's show. Yes, that was called the Homestead Act, which was a series of acts from 1862 to 1916, where former slave owners were compensated for losing what generated their wealth. The books by Laura Ingalls Wilder is what the long-running Little House on the Prairie was based on, came out of the Homestead Acts. And thanks for that on the Rockfins, Mr. Roger Meadows. So let's see. Yeah, so in the call-in, you can be talking about the reparations topic. You can be talking about also this whole speakership drama we're having today, or as I like to call it, the theater. And there's been a lot of talk about how the squad could be doing what these right-wing lawmakers are doing. And I think it's good to point that out. But I guess one thing that kind of bugs me is when the framing is that the squad members are weak or they're dumb, and they just couldn't do this. They don't have like the real courage or whatnot. And I really just like to put it down to corruption. I mean, this thing is what it comes down to, and I feel like what these conversations should always come back to is that both parties, all the members of both parties are just working for the same interests, for the same people. It's all about the billionaires. It's all about the mega corporations. They have the money and they run the roost. And so any of this stuff of, all the squad did that, all the Tea Partiers did that. Yeah, it's theater. It's all what it comes down to is none of these representatives represent us. They represent the big money. And so then where does that lead us? Well, you got to do something about the big money. We're going to have to cut those puppet strings. And then that, to me, gets us back to these things that are kind of boring to talk about, but I think they're the real way that you get at this, are things like constitutional amendments, things like ballot initiatives for public financing of election, clean elections, transparency. And if you're not talking about doing those things and demanding those things, then nothing's going to change. So, like I said, we're going to be jumping into call-ins soon. This is a little break for Sabby before we jump into that, in case anyone's wondering what the heck is going on here. And of course, someone like Matt Gaetz, he's totally fake. And I mean, it's just all part of that theater, and he's no hero, and he's not representing, any of us, and he's playing his role. And so he's getting out there and, pushing Jim Johnson and whatnot. But, yeah, they can do that because, and the squad couldn't because they're representing the big money. The guy, basically, what I think is going on is the billionaires want to have a leash. The moneyed interests, they want to have a leash on the speakership. They want to be able to have that no confidence vote and run that through anytime they want, and so. So they're doing this thing of, it only takes one person to call a no confidence vote to have to vote for speaker again. And I mean, it's hard to even know whether that's a good idea or not. But with the current Congress, it doesn't really matter because, I mean, they all represent the same interests. And let's see. And yeah, there was the panel the other night that Sabby mentioned too, where there was some back and forth in debate, and there was kind of the idea of the panel was called "Is Voting Worth It?" And I thought a better title and a better subject for the panel would be, how can we make voting worth it? What could we do to make voting, make there be things on the ballot and candidates on the ballot that you want to vote for? And then it gets us back to the money, and that whole thing. All right, I see our Miss Sabby is up and ready. It's all right.
All right,
we'll see
guys.
yous all in calling.
Yeah, we are heading over to call-in. The link is pinned at the top of the chat, which I apparently forgot to pull this up on the screen myself here. Okay. What are we talking about on call-in tonight? Join me over there, guys. I really want to hear from you about this discussion. Tonight, call in episode 68, Tim Pool reparations ? Tim Pool recently tweeted support for reparations. Meanwhile, Benedict Cumberbatch's family is facing a reparations fight. Is Tim Pool being genuine? Should Benedict's family pay up? And we can talk more about that conversation as well. Also, feel free to talk about any of the other topics that we discussed on the show tonight. So the link is pinned to the top of the chat. I'll see you guys over at Call In. You know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.